Good morning and good afternoon, Facebook and YouTube friends. We're going to go to Instagram in just a second as soon as it shows us it's live. But welcome. We're here with Coach Diana. If you're here with us, could you please let us know we're live? Hold on, I'm going to go live on Instagram. Hi, Instagram friends. We're so glad that you're here. We are going to get started in just a second. As soon as we know the internet world has worked and someone is here. Thank you. We got some people joining on Instagram. Our Facebook isn't showing live yet, so let me just make sure we're going live there. Thank you, Betsy. Thank you for letting us know you're here and we're live. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, team. Okay, wonderful. We have a really important topic today. And the topic we're talking about is, how do you unveil your true self? Seeking God's purpose for your life. Coach Diana and I were talking about this beforehand, and we feel like, especially in our ministry, so many women get caught in fixing their marriage, fixing whoever's got a problem in their life, as if that's their purpose, that their purpose is to rescue someone else from their own messes or to fix someone else's life so that your marriage won't die, or so that he won't leave you, or so that you won't be alone. But is that really God's purpose for you? Does God have a purpose for you? Diana, you said something when we were talking that I said, don't forget to say that when we talk. So what was your thoughts about that when we were talking?
Well, I think, Leslie, a lot of the work that we do and a lot of the words I hear is, I've lost myself. I don't know who I am. And you can't really live out your true self or know your true self if you're so distracted that you're trying to accommodate whatever's going on around you, or trying to fix and adapt to a situation that you can't control, that seems unmanageable. Or in our case, a lot of women are really focused on changing or helping or fixing their husbands to really be different, to understand. And so that takes the focus off of really what God is showing you to do and how he's calling you to live out your life. You really do lose yourself, as you said, in this becomes your purpose.
We sort of believe, and again, as Christian women, we've been groomed to think this way. So don't beat yourself up for it. I thought this way too until I didn't, right? Until God really showed me that's not what he's saying. But we've been groomed to think that to sacrifice ourselves, to martyr ourselves, to give up ourselves, to die to ourselves, which is the biblical term they use, is a noble thing. And it is, if you know what God's talking about. But to do that in order to enable someone else to continue to be cruel or mean or deceived or self-centered or abusive toward you or adulterous isn't in their best interest any more than dying to yourself to let your kids take drugs, using your retirement, sacrificing your retirement money to buy them drugs so they're happy is a noble sacrifice. It's foolishness. It's foolishness. And yet sometimes in this marriage relationship, we get so caught up in their problem, and their problem has consequences to us for sure. If they're gambling, it's going to hurt our money. If they're cheating on us, it's going to hurt our sexual safety at our marriage. If they're lying to us, it breaks trust. So don't hear me say that that doesn't affect you. But the thing that we're missing is we try to fix them so that we stop getting affected. And how's that working for you? How's that working for you?
I think it's a tool of the enemy to distract us from God's purpose for our life. It's a costly mistake to make because, as you know, we work with women who have been in marriages for many decades, who are looking back and saying, where am I? What is my life? And how have I invested well in what God's called me to do? So when we talk about dying to self, I'm not going to die to myself to live for someone else's self. I'm going to die to myself to live according to God's purposes and what the Holy Spirit is drawing me to. And this is the mistake we make. We think that our husbands are going to direct us into the fulfillment of God's will for our life, when in fact, in many cases, they're not really even tuned in or walking with the Lord.
Yeah. And again, we've had this idea that he has to be our head, our spiritual leader, our covering. If you've been in the Gothard Happy Shiny Family docuseries, some of us drank that Kool-Aid for a while. And I never bought into it much, but I did go to a church that bought into it. So I was kind of an outlier in that community. But I think that it's really important that we understand that headship, even if you're a complementarian in the Bible and you believe that, headship never means that you get to decide for your wife what she's to be, what she's to do, what's God calling her to. That's not his role as your head. His role as your head, as Jesus describes it when he's talking to his disciples about being the head of the church, is their purpose as the head is to not use their authority and power over someone to squash them or control them. He says, hey guys, no, we're not going to do this like the Gentiles rule over others and lord their power over them. Not so with you. That's not how I want you to be the head. If you're going to be the head, I want you to do what I just showed you to do. Wash their dirty feet, serve first. So headship in marriage doesn't mean you get decision-making power over a wife's life. It means you get to serve her first. And as you do that, she submits to you first. And so it's just that beautiful rhythm of mutuality and reciprocity in marriage, not someone has all the power and control over you. They're the master, you're the slave. That is not, that's sort of patriarchal culture, and that is in the Bible, but it doesn't mean it's biblical. That meaning it doesn't mean it's God's will. Slavery, for goodness sake, is in the Bible. But is it God's will? No. It's not God's will for people to be oppressed and treated like objects to use for my financial gain. That's not your purpose as a person. You are created by God. Ephesians 2:10 says, as his workmanship, for good purpose, for you to have purpose, for you to have purpose. So how do you unveil your purpose? What are some things you've done to find your purpose? What are some suggestions? Put it in the chat. Amanda says this topic is so vital and timely. It is. It is timely because it's costly. So I'm at the last quarter of my life, right? I'm past 60 and I'm having different thoughts than maybe some of you who are in your 30s. I didn't have these thoughts when I was in my 30s. But I'm looking back on my life. We're having a party for my husband this weekend. He's having a big one. And, we're looking at our life and do we have regrets? And I don't. I feel like I've done my purpose and that feels really good. People who die usually don't regret what they did. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. People who die regret what they didn't do. I lived an unlived life. I never found my purpose. I never was brave enough, courageous enough, strong enough to do what I knew I was supposed to do. I was too scared of disapproval. I was too scared of what people would think. I was too scared of failure. Don't let that be you. Don't let that be you. Carrie says it's in the Bible, but it doesn't mean it's biblical. Wow. That was an aha moment for you, Carrie. Yeah, that's been an aha moment for me too, that sometimes we make, because it's in the Bible, this is God's will. Slavery and rape was in the Bible. Doesn't mean it's God's will.
When I think about seeking God's purpose for my life, I also think about the fact that God's character, and he really does show his character in the word of God. He always gives us choice and he's always loving us and wanting the best for us, right? And that is not the description of a patriarchal, domineering, controlling spouse that ushers you into all that you can become, into who God is. And I know, I don't know if this is going to be embarrassing for you, but we're celebrating Leslie's husband because it's his birthday. And I think about the qualities that I've been able to see in him that he demonstrates: protectiveness, supportiveness, care, and in a loving way. He demonstrates that. And when we shift our focus from, maybe that's not happening for me in my relationship with my spouse, but God has a different image, a different plan, and a different nature with us. So if you lovingly embrace the compassion he has for you, what is he calling you to?
Even if your husband mocks you for it, even if he, maybe God's calling you to art, maybe he's calling you to paint, maybe when I told my husband I was 40 years old and I said, I think God's calling me to write a book. Can you imagine? I mean, I'm like, me? I didn't go for my PhD because I told myself a lie that I couldn't write. And I said, I have this feeling like God's calling me to write a book and I don't know how to write. I never got A's in English. My teachers never wrote on my papers, oh, you should be a writer one day. I'm like, I don't know what the first thing about writing. And he was nothing but supportive. So part of a good marriage is when someone does what they can to help you be what God wants you to be. And your role as a helpmate to your spouse isn't to enable his sin to flourish. It's to speak into whatever God is calling him to help him be his best self. Now, he may reject that and rebel against that, just like I might have rebelled at what God called me to do. You can't control that. And that's why when your husband is making horrible decisions and he's absolutely not the man you thought he could be or he would be or he is, and he doesn't even want to be that kind of man. Or for some of you, he's pretending to be that kind of man publicly. He's the pastor. He's the elder. He's the deacon. He's the usher. He's the great guy to everyone else. And you live with him. And you know he's not living in integrity. I'm not saying out him. I'm not saying that. But don't enable him.
That's so poignant. The first thing that is necessary is for us to acknowledge what's happening and telling ourselves the truth. And I think a part of that is this isn't working. This isn't godly. This is not the path I want to follow. And so then what next?
And might that unveil God's purpose for you, right? Might that, maybe it's not to be the slave in an oppressive marriage. Maybe that's not God's purpose for you, right? Maybe that's what you've been told, but that's not God's purpose for you. Now, if you're in a slave relationship, like the Bible talks about in 1 Peter, and you don't have a choice because that's the culture you're in, just like if you're in a concentration camp someday because you're a Christian and you don't have a choice, you're in a concentration camp, God's saying you have a choice about how you behave inside that concentration camp because you have purpose, even in that concentration camp. That's why slaves, even though your master is harsh, work as unto the Lord, because don't lose your dignity. Don't lose who you are because of this stupid master who's beating on you. Don't lose your dignity. You are a child of God, even if he doesn't treat you that way. That's the message of what Peter is saying. You have agency, even when it feels like you don't have agency. You're a slave. Or when you're in a concentration camp, you can't leave. But you can decide how you're going to be in that concentration camp. That's your purpose. You might be ministering to people in love there. That's your purpose. Your God has you there, just like he had Joseph in jail, right, for a while. And Joseph couldn't choose to get out of jail, but Joseph could choose how he was going to be in jail. And that was his purpose for a season, to build character for the next season. So I'm going to give you a question that I want you to think about for your purpose. Many of you, I have a link up here for our workshop next Tuesday. The workshop is I'm not okay when he's not okay. Because we've allowed ourselves to be so not only impacted, but infected by someone else's sin or despair or snarkiness, or just look how our culture is today. We get infected with that we aren't our best self anymore. And you know that. That's why you're listening here. You know that you might not be able to control him, but you can work on you. And that is God's purpose for you. So I'm going to give you a question that I want you to think about, and I want you to put your answer in the chat. A lot of us get stuck on the question, why is this happening, God? Why do I have this kind of husband? Why doesn't he change? Why am I married to such a jerk? Why am I not getting any answers from you, Lord? Why is this happening to me? Right? And when you ask that question, what happens is you spiral downward, because there really is no good answer to that. Even if God told you, there's no real good answer that you're going to say, oh, that's why. My husband sexually abused my daughter because he was sexually abused. Oh, I understand. Like, there's no good answer. right? There's no good answer to that question. So I'm going to switch gears, and this is going to help you find your purpose. One simple question. Whatever's going on, whether you're in a bad marriage, whether you have a child who's on drugs, whether you have cancer, whether you're stuck in a traffic jam and you're going to miss your airplane, whatever it is, or your haircut, this is the one question. And if you can answer this question or listen to the answer, you will begin to unveil your purpose. Not, God, why is this happening to me? Ready for the question? God, why is this happening for me? How am I to grow? What am I to learn? What do you have for me? Right? Why is this happening for me? So I'm going to just give an illustration. I'm sitting in traffic. I'm going to miss my airplane. I'm getting all anxious. I'm not being my best self in the car. I'm yelling at the drivers, like, God, why is this happening? You know, I need to get to that speaking event. I'm going to miss my airplane. Yeah, all of that, right? And I switched the question. Why is this happening for me? I don't know. Maybe I'm supposed to learn patience. Maybe I'm supposed to learn I can't control everything. Maybe I'm supposed to learn how to trust God when I don't like the outcome. I'm going to miss my airplane. It's a whole different focus. Now I'm working on my purpose. My purpose is to trust God. My purpose is to learn patience right now. My purpose is to learn to be okay when the situation is something I cannot control. How do I learn to do that? I don't know how to do that. Well, part of maturity is learning how to do that. Now I got some focus, right? Now I've got something to do. It's not dependent on the outside out there. It's just on my growth. How might that change things for you, wherever you are?
I love that, Leslie. You that was the only appropriate why question I could think that would lead to a good outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And my second to that is when things happen to me in my life, or when I'm grieving, or I've lost someone precious to me, the next question I ask is, how do I respond to this? Along with your help and your guidance, how do I respond to this? What are you forming in me? What does this look like for me? And then we're asking different questions. And then so many in the chat have asked, I don't know how to step into God's purpose. But that's what you're asking him. How am I to step in your purpose in this moment? And along with that question, trusting that the Holy Spirit is guiding you, it's kind of exciting to see what he does next.
Yeah. And when you see that God has often put people in the scriptures in very uncomfortable situations, like Joseph, like Esther. Esther was sold into sex slavery. Why, God? Why is this happening for me? Well, she doesn't know. And there was no answer God could give her at that moment, but she was doing what she could do in the best way she could do it, instead of being angry that she was stuck in the situation and trying to change the situation. So we've been using this chart. Well, we'll be using this in our workshop a bit, but we could use this for right now. So there's nothing wrong with trying to change the external when you're upset. So let's say, your husband's bugging you and you're feeling really upset, and you say, hey, that really hurts my feelings when you say that. And he says, oh, I'm sorry. That's a good thing, right? Because that helps your marriage. But let's say you say that to him and he calls you a name, and you know that telling him your feelings is not going to help one bit. You're not going to change him. He's going to be who he's going to be. And most of you who are listening to us are in that group. All right. We're just going to assume that because we attract that kind of crowd because of the ministry we have. So let's just assume that nothing you say to him is going to make any difference to him. Right. So now you're just stuck. You're just stuck. Like, why is this happening for me? What do I need to learn? I need to learn to get some boundaries. I might need to learn how to work and get a job and support myself, because he is not going to be trustworthy financially. I can't count on him for my well-being. I've learned that. Now, what's my responsibility to steward my life? What do I need to do? What do I need to learn? How do I need to function differently so I don't sink into depression? So I get the help I need so that I'm not continuously traumatized and living in fear, or financially bankrupt because he's a gambler, because he's spending money on porn sites, or whatever he's doing that you can't change. Why is this happening for me? I need to learn to speak up for myself. I need to learn to have boundaries. I need to learn to be independent. And that might all be part of God's will for you long term. Because ultimately, the bottom line is it is God's will that you mature, that you grow.
Mhm.
Sometimes He uses easy things to help us grow, good parents, loving husband, great job, college education. And sometimes He uses suffering 101, which nobody signs up for, but He uses those things to help us grow, right? And God tells us that. Consider it all joy whenever you face trials. Why? Because they help you grow. That's why you say, why is this trial happening? No. Why is this trial happening for me? Because it's developing muscles in you, James tells you. It's developing the muscle of perseverance, faith, trust. These are muscles that you're going to need for the next part of your life journey, because I may call you into leadership someday. You're going to have to trust me more than you trust me now. And if you don't know how to do that, you won't be able to do that. You don't know what God's up to, but He's building muscles for your growth. That is His will, even if your marriage doesn't make it. Your life isn't over if your marriage doesn't make it.
I love the way you say that, because in places where we feel so stuck on the external, when we start asking ourselves those questions, we find ourself, and in ourself we find strength, choice, agency, and that's how we become unstuck.
Yeah. And Sherry, it's really hard when you're so ill that you can only work part-time and everything is crumbling. You're absolutely right. And that's why you need support. That's why we do these public groups, which you can feel the support around you, right? We do these on, and 4 or 5 times a year. We get on Facebook Live for a couple of days, 2 weeks actually. It's just to give you that support and get you to see what it feels like to have people who know what your life is like and to bound around you. And we do have coaching and support groups that you can join, because it is almost impossible to do this without support. God didn't wire us to grow all by ourselves, right? We can die all by ourselves. It's not fun, but He didn't wire us to grow all by ourselves. He puts us in families, and some of our families are not healthy families, and so we don't grow healthy, right? We grow wilted. We grow deformed, just like you see a plant that doesn't get the right light or the right nutrients, and it's kind of wilty, or it didn't get stalked or whatever it's supposed to have in order to have strong stems. And so then you move into another family, the family of God, which is where you are right now. And how can this family be helpful to you? And I think this is so important. We need good girlfriends. Even if you're married, you need good girlfriends. And I hope you have them. And if you don't have them, people influence us. We'll learn this at the workshop, and how they influence us. And if you hang around with people who are influencing you in negative ways, they're going to take you down. And I wonder, Sherry, if your health is also affected and caused by what you're living with, because studies now show living with a toxic and destructive person affects your heart, it affects your immune system, it affects your gut, and it costs you. It costs you. Is it God's will for you to give up your health and well-being just to stay married to a destructive, toxic person? And I think that's a really important question you have to ask yourself biblically. So we want to ask you one thing, and then we're going to move to some questions. What takeaway did you get for this for you? What's your one wow or wow? Well, we heard a couple in the chat, but what's your one thing? Because I think if you're going to spend 20 minutes with us or an hour with us, we'll be here for about an hour. But if you're going to spend how much ever time, ask yourself, what did I just hear that resonated for me? Why am I here, God? I'm here for something. What was it? What's for me today? In this time I spent, my time is valuable. My time is valuable. Your time is valuable. I don't take that lightly. So I want you to anchor to one thing. What's my one key takeaway for me today from what I heard? Heron says God is with us in every circumstance and can use it for our good. Not only can He use it for our good, Aaron, He does use it for our good. That's why He says in Romans 8, that God causes all things to work together for our good. What does that good mean? It does not mean our pleasure. It does not mean our prosperity. It means for our maturity. That's why you can ask, why is this happening for me? Because we can trust God is using it or will use it for our good, even a divorce, even an abusive spouse. I remember talking to a woman who was married to an abusive sociopathic spouse, and she said, I learned so much about myself. I never learned how to set boundaries. I never learned to speak up for myself. I never learned how to have a no. I had to learn that real quick. That's why that happened for me, because I was just a people pleaser in an unhealthy way. So, what's your one takeaway? Self-care. Self-care, to know my challenges are allowed for our good. Why is this happening for me? I need to grow up and mature. It's hard to say that. I'm in my late 60s. You know, Robin, I matured more in my 60s, I think, than any other decade in my life. So God isn't done with us yet. Moses matured in his older years, right? He was in the desert for a long time. So 60s is not, that's kind of the right time because we're done with our kids. We have a little bit more time to focus on us. And we start to ask those questions because we're facing the end, right? And so it's a really good time to mature.
And that is God's will for us to continue on to maturity in our faith and in our lives. What a great purpose. I love that you said that we can focus on that more intensely now and seek Him out in those things.
Yeah. I have felt like a little girl through this, and I believe God wants me to mature. He would not allow me to grow. I assume you're talking about your husband. So, yeah, God does want you to mature. And this is the fallacy in some of our Christian teaching, is that especially if you're ascribing to the patriarchal kind of Gothard submission, headship, all that, it's like, oh, now you've become a child again because you're married. Like now you're 21, you're old enough to get married, you're old enough to drive and get a credit card and do all kinds of stuff as an adult. But now you become a child again and you're not allowed to make decisions for yourself and you're not allowed to have a no. And it's sort of like you're an infant again, needing to be taken care of and covered by a man, when that is not what God says about marriage. Marriage is two adults coming together. Eve had full agency to make decisions, right? And she made some bad ones for sure. And we're going to make bad ones as we're grown-ups, right? And you learn from them. But it's not that, oh, she was bad for making a decision. She wasn't. God gave her the right to make a decision. That's part of being an adult. You get that right. And a human, you get that right. Even a 2-year-old starts to realize, oh, I don't have to do what you say. No, that's my decision. No, I'm not eating those beans. And it's powerful. Your no is powerful. Use it. Use it.
I love that. What does it look like for you to look at yourself in this marriage as a grown adult, capable of making your own choices and decisions based on what you know is true and right for you?
Yeah, Kim's saying, I'm seeing a lot about difficult things and learning. The right time is now, Erin says. Yeah. Marriage is two adults coming together. And sometimes, honestly, we get married when we're not fully adults. Whether we're 21 or not, we're not fully adults. I wasn't a full adult when I got married. Got married at 23, right? I wasn't a full adult. But what marriage doesn't do is it doesn't stop you from becoming your full self. And when someone tries to stop you from becoming your full self and maturing and growing, then they're not honoring God's will for your life. And so who do you serve? Your husband, or do you serve God? Your husband is not your God. He doesn't get to say, you don't get to grow anymore. That's not his right to say that, even as a husband.
So I think a good question to ask if you're in that situation is, what is my role, or in what ways am I allowing this to happen to me?
Yes. Yes. So sometimes you're in a traffic jam and you're not allowing that to happen. You're just in it and you got to figure it out like you're in a concentration camp. So how am I going to grow through this? Sometimes you're in a situation where you're allowing yourself to be used and abused, and you don't have to. We have laws in this country that say it's against the law to be abused and raped. You don't have to. Let yourself be a repeat victim. So then if you say, well, why am I afraid to? That's a good question. Why is this happening for you? Maybe it's to pull out some of those fears and to work on them. And we're going to talk a lot about that at the workshop. So if you have not signed up for our workshop yet, it's next Tuesday. It's going to be at a different site, not on Facebook, not on Instagram, because we want it to be a private site where you're not worried about putting anything in the chat. The chat will not go public at all. It'll just be for that hour. So it's www.leslievernick.com/join webinar, one word, join webinar, and you can save your seat for either noon Eastern time. I will be live. Diana will be there. Coach Jen will be there. We are going to give you some tools so that you can grow. What do you do? Like, all right, how was that? Now what's my next step? We'll give you those tools. There's 4 tools we're going to give you that you can use. And the workshop itself will last about an hour. We'll be teaching with PowerPoints. We'll give you, so you can take pictures, so you don't have to like, oh, I wish I had a picture of that. You can take a picture, bring your phone. We'll give you a handout with answers in there so that you can take notes. We really want you to get this. We really do. And it's free. So if this is you, I'm not okay. When outside of my world is not okay, whether it's my spouse, whether it's my adult child, whether it's another person, whether it's my boss, whether it's the traffic. I'm not okay when you're not okay. What's my problem? What's the other person's problem? What's our problem together? And we'll unpack that for you so that you can know which problem you're supposed to work on. Because there are problems here, but which problem gives you the best bang for your energy? And we're going to talk about how you can do that. So please show up at the workshop. It's next Tuesday, the 13th, I believe. And it is 7:30 Eastern time, noon Eastern time. You can pick one time or the other. Show up live, please, because you've experienced being on this live today. You see the energy, you see the comments. That helps you. That helps you when you're just watching a video. It's not the same. So it really helps you to be in the energy of the room. It helps you to see the comments because it helps you to see, wow, I'm not so stupid. I'm not alone. I'm not the only one in this situation. I'm not the only one who's messed up and confused. I'm not the only one who doesn't know what the Bible really says. You're not the only one. And you don't ever know that if you don't partner with other people that you can see we're all on a journey. And some of the women will be a little further along on that journey than you. And that will be a big relief because you're going to say, wow, if you can do it, I can do it. And that helps you. Also, we will have about an hour to an hour and a half Q&A afterwards. So the workshop will take about an hour. Give yourself 2 hours if you want to really get the most out of it so that you can be there. So pick a private space, even if it's in your car, to watch the workshop. And then you can ask your questions privately there. If you can't attend live, you can sign up and get a replay of the workshop itself, but you will not get any access to the chat or the Q&A, which is priceless, really. It's quite valuable. It's probably just as equally important. So if you're the kind of person who really values these lives and values that sense of community and that you're not alone and getting ideas from other women, then please show up live so you get that community and that sense of community as well. All right, enough about that. We want to go to some questions that you have because we do have a hard stop at 11. So here's the first question. So it'd be wise to view slavery as a slave to our sinful nature rather than a slave to our husband's will. I'm not exactly sure if you're just making a statement or if you're asking if it's yes or no. The Bible tells us that we are a slave to our sinful nature and that Jesus sets us free from that slavery, right? That his forgiveness and his grace and the Holy Spirit's power sets us free. So we are no longer slaves. We are now sons and daughters. You are a daughter of the Most High God. So I would never refer to myself anymore as a slave to sin. I would refer to myself as a daughter of God, right? Because it's a different vibe. If I'm a daughter of the King, I'm feeling a whole lot different than if I'm a slave to sin, right? So I wouldn't see myself as a slave to sin anymore. But you are not to be ever a slave to your husband's will. That's idolatry. You're putting him as your God.
Yeah, I would anchor on that as well. We are no longer slaves to sin. We are called to freedom. And that's really the topic of what we're talking about today is stepping into the freedom of who you are in Christ, redeemed. And you're no longer a slave to sin or to anyone else. our devotion and our freedom is to pursue and follow God.
Mhm. Okay, next question, Diana. I'm going to give you this to roll with at first. I feel called to do something, but my husband says not to do it. Am I supposed to submit to my husband?
I well, I would anchor on the word supposed, and I would say if you feel called to do something, we're talking today specifically about living God's purpose out for your life and knowing your true self, and it comes to a matter of who will you follow. I might have a conversation with my husband about that, but ultimately, when I think about your question, the image that I get and what I've been taught is that when I see Jesus, it's going to be me and him. And we're going to maybe have a conversation about my life. And I'm going to speak to him about my life. My husband's not going to be at my side taking the hit for me. So ultimately, in things that matter to me the most, absolutely no, I'm not going to submit. I am going to walk out this life and know that I'm doing it, what is that, vertically, not horizontally first, right? But there are some things that we might compromise and discuss and surrender to with each other. You know, my husband wanted a new truck. We didn't have a car payment. He convinced me that it was a good idea to get a new truck. I submitted to his decision to purchase that truck. It wasn't my preference. I would have rather driven that other thing until until it dropped. But that's an area where it didn't cost me the depth of my beliefs and my values to say, okay, I submit to that.
Yeah. You know, the Lord tells us submit to your husband, but really ultimately submit to God. And so if God's telling you to do something, I wouldn't put your husband in between that. However, I would ask your husband, I think out of respect for him and his partnership with you in this marriage, what are his objections? When he says not to do it, I would say, what bothers you about this? And I would want to hear his heart, because if it's more self-centered, like it's going to take time away from the family, it's going to, put you out in the public more, and I just want you home. If it's going to cost money and I don't want to spend the money on that, it's not that we don't have the money, but I don't want to spend the money on that. I would say that those are really red flags, that are his no is motivated by fear and jealousy and not your best interests. Right? However, if you say, "What are your objections to that?" And he says, "No, I know that you've got 15 things on your plate. You're already kinda crabby with the kids now. I'm a little concerned for your energy levels. You've been having some health issues. We don't have the money to spend on this idea that you have. And so I'm not thinking this is the wisest choice for you." Then that may be something that God uses for you to listen to, because many people have done stupid things thinking that God told them to do it. So just because they think God tells them to do it doesn't necessarily mean God did tell them to do it. So I do think that the wisdom, like the Bible says, the wisdom of counselor, a multitude of counselors can give you wisdom. But if his objections are mostly self-centered and fear-based objections, I think that can tell you something, that it's more not for your best, but for what's in his best interests. And so when I told my husband that I felt God calling me to write a book, did he have to sacrifice for me to sit home all weekends for a year writing books? Yes. Yes, he did, right? And so he could have said, "I'm not willing to do that. We're not gonna be able to do this, and we're not gonna be that. You're gonna be busy all." But he didn't, because he knew that he trusted that I heard from God, and that's what we were supposed to do, and that's what I was supposed to do, but he had to do something too. He had to parent on the weekends, he had to take over different things. So I think those are the things that you want in a marriage. The Proverbs 31, read Proverbs 31, because we've read it wrong. We've read it in the past like, "Oh my gosh, I could never be her. She's just so busy. She's exhausting." That's not the purpose of Proverbs 31. Read it. She is a independent, resourceful, mature, godly woman who makes her own money, makes her own decisions, and she's a wife. Says her husband trusts her to do him good, not harm, all the days of his life. It's a picture of a good marriage, which she's talking to her son about. He's talking to his son about, this is what the kind of woman that you want. You want a woman who's strong and independent, can make her own decisions. You don't want a child wife. And that's what God calls us to be, is a godly woman. It says she's clothed with strength and dignity, and she smiles at the future unafraid. That's God's will for you. Right? Not to be scared to make a decision, scared to, that's like the steward who gave the man the talent, and he said, "Oh, I was scared. I buried it. I didn't do anything with it. I was afraid." And God doesn't want you to come to him at the end of your life saying, "I lived afraid. I lived afraid." I think he'd rather us make a mistake and try than to live afraid. All right. What's the difference between calling and career talents? Got a thought about that, Diana?
Do I have a thought? Boy, I think we all a lot of people have careers, and it may coincide with your calling, but I don't necessarily believe that your calling is always your career. Um, a career is a vocation that you choose based on your gifts and talents, right? And you walk that out. God gives us strengths and gifts and talents, and if we're fortunate enough to discover that, we can walk in that and earn a living doing that. Our calling is, I think, from a deeper place of self, where we walk out and live out those things that matter most to us, and the Bible's pretty clear about our calling in God in terms of how we're to walk in this world and how we're to proclaim his truth. I think if you're fortunate enough to figure out how to have a career that fits with your calling, I think you're ultimately deeply fulfilled.
I love that answer. I'll just share my story. So I think God puts talents and gifts inside of everyone, because that's so, just like he puts inside of a seed something is supposed to become, like a sunflower or a rose bush, or it's not everything the same, so God's put different talents or gifts inside of each of us. Some of them we discover, some of them we don't discover. So I knew by default that I was never going to be a mathematician or a scientist or any of those technical fields. Me in tech, I didn't like it then, I don't like it now. Not my calling. God didn't give me those gifts. Right. So that was really clear. But I knew I liked to talk. I like to help people. So counseling, or, that was my career choice. All right. I went into that and I was good at it. I had no idea that I had any writing gifts. I didn't think I could write, right? I had no idea I had that until God called me to write. And that's when I felt like, you're asking me to write a book? God, I didn't go for my PhD because I didn't have those gifts. I don't know how to write. I'm not a writer, and he didn't, he said, this is what he said to me. He said, "I'm not asking you to be a writer. I'm asking you to give me your 5 loaves and 2 fish. So sit down and write, and I will bring the increase." And so that's what I did. And it was hard. It was like taking my wrists and setting them up to IV poles every weekend. And it was draining, and it was exhausting, and it was scary, and it was hard, but it was a calling. And so I was obedient to that calling. And as I did it faithfully, and I prayed for the gift, I said, "God, I need the gift of tongues and writing. I need that. I can't do this. I don't have enough wisdom, and I don't have enough ability on my own." And I believe he gave that to me. So it was in this combination of my natural giftings and God's calling that you start walking step by step in obedience. Had I not done that, had I not sat my butt down every day and practiced my writing, and I went to junior college and took some writing classes to just see punctuation. I was just even embarrassed to send anything to anybody because I didn't even remember my grammar. So I took steps of faith and obedience toward the calling, and God blessed those. But I started at 40. The book didn't come out till I was like 49. All right. So it was 9 years of obedience to my first book. That's not the 7th, but the first book. All right. So that's the calling, that you just walk faithful. You don't know. Moses was groomed in the desert for a long time. He didn't know what exactly God was going to do, but he did his next right steps. Ruth decided to move from Moab to Bethlehem with her cranky mother-in-law, Naomi. He didn't know she was calling him to be the mother of the future Messiah in that lineage, but she just did the next right step. So if you feel God calling you, start moving in those steps. Then, after I was writing for a season, I was going to write a marriage book. And a mentor said to me, Leslie, I had written my book, The Emotionally Destructive Relationship, and got a lot of positive feedback from women who felt like no one ever understood that. It wasn't about marriage, it was about all kinds of relationships. I wrote about my mother and me and all of that. And so he said, I don't think you should write a book on marriage. He said, that's not your calling. And there's lots of qualified big names out there, Gary Chapman, et cetera, who are writing about marriage. And you're just a woman, and in a patriarchal church Christian culture, they're not going to invite you to speak on marriage unless you speak as a couple. So I think you should still write about the destructive parts of marriage. No one else is talking about that. And that was God's calling to me through this person and some Bible verses I read to zero in. I'm not counseling everybody. I'm not speaking to everybody. I don't do women's retreats anymore. I zeroed all my energy into using my gifts and abilities to one population, Christian women in destructive relationships. And that's you. And that's so all these years from 40 to now here, I've gone narrow, 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 because that's my calling. But I didn't know that at the beginning of my career. I just started walking, and God showed you. I will instruct you and guide you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. And if you take those steps of obedience and don't live in fear, I don't think I can take that first step. If you don't take the first step, God's not going to meet you. I remember crying in my office one day, I can't do it. I can't do it. And he said, it's clear as day. Well, okay, I can pick someone else. I can pick someone else. I'm giving you the opportunity. You do it or not do it, obey or not obey. And it was just that clear. That, okay, I'll do it. And so I think that's how I would define the difference.
One thing I heard you say in between your words was, well, one thing I didn't hear you say was easy.
Yeah, no, it was never easy. It was never easy. There was a lot of criticism. There was a lot of pushback. I lost some opportunities in areas that I would have liked to have opportunities, both because I was a female and because I was saying things they didn't like. Like divorce might be possible if you are being abused. That was not being said at all from a conservative Christian perspective. And I had to do a lot of homework and hired a Dallas theologian to review my manuscript and give me if I was unbiblical in any way. But he was very supportive of it. So it's those kind of things. You just, walking with God and doing what he wants you to do doesn't promise to be easy, but it is good. It is good.
Leslie, we had someone in the chat, and I'm trying to find it, so please forgive me if I don't repeat it exactly, but someone in the chat said, I am confused about discovering my purpose, and maybe it's too late because I'm 69.
It's interesting. I'm past 69, and I've just started painting. And I was just talking with a painting coach yesterday, and she said, you have really captured this person's emotions really well. So I paint women in destructive, I make up women, I don't paint you from Facebook, but I paint women. And some of you have seen my paintings in the background when I'm in my other office. And I just want to capture their resilience and their strength, but their sadness or their anger. And she said, wow, you've really captured. I didn't know I had any abilities at all. And I'm starting, and I don't have the greatest ones, but I'm working on them, and I'm past your age now. So it's never too late. It's never too late. Don't ever tell yourself that lie. You don't know how long you have. And if you have 5 good years or 10 good years to do what God's calling you to do, wouldn't you want to enter heaven saying, I did it, Lord. I did what you told me to do. I didn't live scared. I didn't tell myself I was too old. I don't know when I'm going to die. You might not die till 102. So you got a lot of years left. Go for it. I don't know what my calling is other than being a wife and mom. What do you think about that?
Well, I definitely think being a wife and a mom is a calling. It's not
Yeah.
something you should do just because you think everybody's doing it, right? But that's a season of our life, and we're so much more than just those 2 roles that we play.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I think seeking out your calling starts, and it can be done in many ways, but it starts. It starts by noticing what you're passionate about, noticing what is dear to you. And I think, Leslie, deciding what God is calling you to, I think it's birthed within us, but it's also, I think, time that we need to spend in quiet reflection with God and asking Him to reveal that to us. And I asked one of my clients, had this career path, and I asked him, I said, geez, how did all of that lead to where you're at today? And he said, it just kind of unfolded. And so I think a part of knowing what your calling is being open, being available, and just saying to God yes and watching to see how he unfolds. Like you said, it's step by step. He doesn't give us the whole roadmap all at once.
Mm-hmm. You just walk in it, and you begin to discover, oh, and so let me just answer the last question in light with this. If I am doing what I feel called to do, but I'm not finding success, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything, right? Because the outcome is up to God. You are to do what you're. So this is really important, ladies. So let's say that you're taking some of our advice from the workshop that we're going to give you, and you start implementing them, and your husband doesn't like it. So you're doing what God's calling you to do. For example, you are speaking the truth in love. You are setting some boundaries. If he's an unhealthy man, he is not going to like it. He'd much rather you stay in a childlike, subservient, easily controlled position. But if you're called to be a mature adult, which God calls you to, then what does that look like in a mature, healthy relationship? Well, you can't control his side of the street, but you can control your side of the street. So as you do that, you're walking in faith, and he is not going to like it. At least most of them do not like it, right? So does that mean you're wrong? Does that mean you live for his approval, or do you live for God's approval? And so this is really that juncture where, just like with your kids, you can be a good mom and your kids can be really unhappy with you. And you don't know the outcome of your momming until they're about 30, right? Until they're about 30. Then you start looking at their life and you say, wow, I did do a good job. They're good kids, right? Between then, you're not quite sure of the outcome, right? And so give yourself space to do what you know. I wrote thousands of pages of junk that is delete, 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 delete. So I could say, oh, I think God's calling me to write, but nobody wants to read it, or nobody. You don't know that. You're practicing and you're being faithful in the moment. You're to do what you're to do, whether it's being a parent, whether it's trying to write, whether it's counseling someone and they're not listening or they're not heeding your advice and they're going to go do what they're going to do. Does that mean I'm a bad counselor? No. Does that mean I failed? No. Jesus talked to lots of people. Most of them didn't give him the time of day. Did that mean he wasn't doing his calling? So I think we live in a very American kind of view of what we're always wanting the outcome. The outcome has to be positive and successful in order for us to feel good. But maybe we just need to focus on the process. Like, I am a good mother. Right now, my kids wouldn't show that, but I am a good mother, or I am a good wife. My husband wouldn't agree because I don't coddle him or kowtow to his craziness, but I am a good wife. I don't have a good marriage. There's a difference here. And so I think if you can get clear, you can live in peace, even if the relationship or the outcome isn't what you want, right? We don't have a guarantee on the outcome. You can be a good chemo patient and still die, right? You can do your due diligence in taking care of your health and still have a sudden heart attack. We can't control all of the factors. We only do our part.
Yeah, and we have to look at how we're defining success. God, if you look at the word of God, God defines success very differently than we do. And
Mhm.
and success for you might be very different than what I consider success for me. So really kind of narrowing that down. I'm not going to
Mhm.
borrow the world's values on what makes me
Mhm.
successful.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that I ran the good race and all the disciples were killed, right? So were their outcomes unsuccessful? No, but they didn't see the success of their ministry in the moment. They saw it years later, from heaven. So please don't let our world standards, I made a lot of money, everybody liked me, I got lots of opportunities. Those aren't God's measures for success. I've lost, opportunities from certain groups because of what I say. And I'm okay with that because I'm committed to saying what I believe God's calling me to say, the truth. And if they don't want their people to hear that or they don't want me to influence them, that's their decision. I can't control that. I can just control what my side of the street is supposed to be. So I think those are the important things that you have to really unveil God's purpose in your life. You may say things as a good mom or a good wife that your kid or your husband or you're even a good thing to your elderly parents, that you might say some things they don't like. Like, I have to take away your driver's license because you're not safe on the road. They're not going to like it. Does that mean you weren't a good daughter? Right? So I think this is where you need to get really clear on your identity and not let someone else define that for you. All right, we are out of time. We're going to close for now. I think we're out of questions. We did a good job today. We finished all our questions, Diana.
We did.
So thanks for joining us on Instagram. I wish I knew how to interact with you. I'm getting better. We are on Instagram these days. I'm still not tech. That's not my jam. And so until I know how to interact with you with the chat or whatever, I don't know how to do that yet. But I will learn, I promise. And thank you for joining us. If you have not signed up for our workshop yet, I'm going to say it out loud again one more time for those of you who might not have the link on Instagram. It's leslievernick.com/join webinar, all one word. It's next Tuesday at noon Eastern time and 7:30 Eastern time. And we would love to see you show up live there to get some additional teaching that goes even deeper than we've been doing these last couple of days in our Facebooks. We're giving you tastes, and a lot of you are getting some really good aha moments. Today, the question was, Lord, what is this for me? Why is this for me? What do I have to learn? What do I have to change? What do I have to grow in order to handle this moment? I can't change this moment, but how do I handle this moment or this diagnosis or this situation in a way that's godly and mature and the way that I would be proud of, even if the outcome isn't what I wanted? I'm not going to get to the airport on time, but how do I handle myself in this car in a way that gives you honor because the angels are watching? How do I handle this argument with my teenage kid who's given me lip in a way that honors you, even if they hate me afterwards, because I still say no? What is this happening for me? Why is this happening for me? What do I have to learn and grow? Hope you go with that question and it brings you all kinds of good fruit. All right. Thanks. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye now.